early on, there's a really tragic scene. Knight finds out that his son, his very young son, has been conscripted and joining him at the front lines, and his son is completely petrified. He's probably about 11 years of age. He then decides that his need to protect his son, he's going to position himself in areas on the battlefield that are less likely to be result in injury. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he runs into another part of the Confederate force, and the man in command tells his troops and Jones to align bayonets. His son, of course, doesn't know what to do, so he helps him do that, and then the man in command tells them to charge, and the boy is so petrified that he stands up and doesn't charge and gets shot, and his father grabs him, and you can almost taste the sadness and the desperateness of being in this position. In many ways, it sort of reminds me a little bit of Paths of Glory, for the visual spectacle of war, and how there's no account really for being careful. It's all ridiculous, charging at the enemy, knowing that you're going to lose a considerable number of your own men. It's sort of insanity, really. Right, let's get it straight. This is Newton Knight runs back with his severely injured son and trying to search out a medic, a doctor. There are none. They're all too busy. He then decides that he needs to remove himself from the firing line, so to speak, and eventually comes to the realization that his son is slowly dying from the gunshot wound, and there's this traumatic scene where he stops under a tree, his child frightened, and he tries to soothe him with the religious sort of mumbo jumbo about God will love you, Jesus will love you, as the last breaths we witness as his son passes away. And it's at this moment that Knight decides that he's going to desert. There's an interesting a couple of scenes that lay out the politics involved in the United States from around the Civil War time. Newton Knight's other child, because he's been quite promiscuous, having children with numerous women, after burying his son, his other child develops a fever. He desperately wants to get a doctor, but there aren't any around, and he's told in the town about this Negro Creole female doctor of sorts. Desperate, he contacts her. She comes to the house, and she gets the fever down. He's very grateful, and although he has no money, he pays her in kind with a ring,
we then shoot forward 80 odd years to Newton's great grandson, whose mother was half black, half white, half caste, and we witnessed a courtroom where the great grandson of Newton Knight is the subject of a debate in the law as to whether he is partly coloured, and they decide that he's 1/8, and as such is there considered to be part of the coloured community. And clearly at that particular time, and even at that date, which we're talking about after the Second World War, civil rights just don't exist, and blacks are still regarded and segregated as second-class citizens. So it's an interesting sort of historical message about how the ruling white classes considered even those who second and third generation, as long as they had a percentage of Afro-American in them, they were regarded as such, even though they looked as white as you and I. Racism, how it's practiced and still is practiced in the United States.
As Knight returns to his home and he checks in on his women and the offspring that he's sowed, he becomes aware that the cavalry of the Confederate Army are going round to properties, basically stealing livestock and anything they can get their hands on, because they're without these resources at the front fighting the battle, and it's really pillage effectively. And interesting scene where Knight says that he's going to battle the cavalry, and he then goes about teaching his 3 young children how to shoot a gun, a rifle, and it's quite amazing how this brings out this aspect of the impact of war that leads to this type of destruction and of one's own people, as they're in a Confederate state, and apparently are fighting for those people in the state, but at the same time they're debilitating them to the point where they can't survive. It's clear after the incident involving the children that the Confederate officials are also after deserters. So Knight leaves, and it's a little later where he's chased by dogs, and he suffers a nasty bite from one of these pit bull dogs as he tries to flee, and he makes his way into the swamp area which are inhabited by the slave black folk who have escaped their owners, and they've set up residence in this area which is so difficult to locate, so they have a high degree of protection against the Confederate Army, Confederate establishment, and their Knight meets up with the two Negro and Negress, Maharishi Ali and the woman, as mentioned before. We also catch notices that have been put up that Knight is now wanted for treason and desertion, and so he's well and truly now an outlaw, so to speak. In the swamp at night, first sort of dialogue between Moses and Knight. Moses is wearing a sort of a support for like a neck brace, and he asks Knight where Texas is. Knight says, "Oh, it's quite a way." And then Moses describes the day when his wife and child is sold by a landowner as a slave, and ends up going to Texas, and he went wild. He describes him going wild at this happening, and they beat him severely, and that's ended up with this brace to support his sort of spine, and the conversation, you know, can you imagine having a conversation like that today? I guess in some parts of the world possibly, but this is the mid-19th century in Mississippi, in the southern states of America, the so-called land of the free now. Love the acting, superb acting between Ali and McConaughey. Another memorable scene involves Knight with Rachel, the woman, African American woman, and she is curious to know what the writing is on the rifle. She can't read, of course, and she's a slave. Education not part of their day-to-day sort of priorities for these landowners, and the tenderness with which McConaughey partakes to her, and then he continues to be the teacher as he again teaches the women, this woman in particular, Rachel, of how to use a shotgun, and lots of sort of social messages that we're seeing in this film, that one needs to acknowledge the history of slavery in that part, well, in many parts, but certainly in the southern part of the United States in the mid-19th century. After that, we move forward to July 1863. This is, and we see some footage in a sort of sepia style, really, of a famous battle which was won by the Unionists over the Confederates, and the cinematography just displays the carnage and death on the battlefield, and the few survivors, plus the actual on location shots are so good. They really are brilliantly done. It really encaptures entirely the historical aspect to the movie, and of course the way the extras are used to illustrate the destruction and how they are seen. Horses in abundance, of course, and it really is a visual spectacle that enriches the quality of the film. We then see Knight, who's gone to the site of the slaughter, and he finds a few of his colleagues alive, and he helps them get away from the area and takes them to the swamp area. The expression on their faces when they see the others there, the black slaves, appearing quite relaxed and at ease, and of course they have weapons. So again, these experienced soldiers now have the opportunity to join this band of black slaves and other deserters in Knight's next project, next plan, to create a militia. McConaughey's such a great actor. The next phase, we see him as the leader, educating his troops and the families that have all joined together as this new sort of independent free state. And he describes how the landowners have exploited the poor, the African American, and given a pittance to white families, whilst taking the lion's share of their assets, including food. And he inspires his followers to go to an adjoining park just near them and basically take away what is rightfully theirs, and reciprocate the actions that were taken by the landowner in stealing. But they're only stealing their own stuff, and it's inspirational, and the music captures the time. You know, there's that sort of Cajun sort of style, folk music that's such a pleasure with these sort of movies. Then, as so often with these highly charged movies depicting history, we then see the Confederate Army basically torch the farms of the working class families, white families that are struggling to have a living after being sort of having to contribute a huge percent in the form of sort of like a tax of their
belongings, their crops, their assets to the military fight against the Unionists. Now, for that, they're being repaid by having their farms torched because they are shielding Knight and his rebel militia army. Rings so many bells really with what's happening with regard to Gaza and Hamas are the militia, and the response from the Israeli military is to murder and pillage. Anyway, let's back to the movie. Of course, this is because the higher echelons of the Confederate Army tried to tempt Knight to give himself up with certain promises that we're all fully aware would not be met if he was to give up his freedom, as he puts it, and he lays this down to a young man in his militia whose mother's farm has been torched and desperately wants it to end, and for some reason believes that it would end if Knight's militia would just to walk out of the swamp and say, fair dues, we made our point. And Jones knows that they'd all been tried and convicted and hung for deserting, of course.
Some of Knight's white militia who were in the Confederate Army after that lost battle hold quite racist views and aren't that keen on taking on the army to continue the battle, and feel that they ought to take the offer by the hierarchy in the Confederate Army, pardon, etc., etc. Knight indicates that if they're not happy, they can walk away without any bad feeling, and some of them agree to do this. So they give up their freedom, so to speak, with Knight's militia, and of course they walk out, and then they get tried and they are hung by the neck, because the landowners, the military in the pockets of the landowners, are unlikely to show any, how can I put it, feeling of understanding as to why they did what they did. They are just rigidly opposed to any attitude that doesn't walk hand in hand with theirs. As far as they're concerned, they are traitors, they are guilty of treason, and they will be punished. We heard this message before. We've heard this message before, I think, recently. Deserters, those must be dealt with the full force of the law of the landowner and the higher echelons of the army. Colonel Hood with his lieutenant stand and peer through the haze at the numbers that are giving themselves up. In reality, they are the young boys who've been fighting with the militia, who basically are too young to really consider the wider issues and just want to be back with their family. However, Hood shows absolutely no remorse and directs to the colonel to hang them regardless, and that's exactly what happens. As portrayed in this movie, Ross is able to capture moments of significant political change, and following the end of the Civil War and the Free State of Jones being established by those that remained, inspired by the leadership of Knight, he proclaims various rules, and one vital one is that the right to own the land that you work on, and this is then followed by an emotional coming together of Moses' family as they take ownership of a small piece of land and start to cultivate it. It's an emotional moment, the first time they've ever done that in their lives. This is what freedom can taste like, and it just rings so many bells with what's happening in 2023 by members of so-called humanity that are no more human than Hitler's bully boys. This movie continues to be a history lesson. Moses' son is stolen and put into slavery. Moses is abhorrent and full of hatred as at the loss of his son. We end up in a court of law with Knight. The court decides on the fate of what they call apprenticeships, a new law created in Mississippi with regard to rights, ownership rights of apprentice, which means basically black males, well, and black females, and eventually in the court, Knight buys back the child that was stolen from Moses in the face of all these white people, and he's reunited with his father, but it will come as a price. The history lesson continues in the movie. We then move on, and of course it is based on fact, this movie, to the passing of the right to vote for all races, all creeds and all colours, passed by the Union, the federal government. However, in Mississippi, the local government clearly not into enforcing this piece of legislation. And then we see the ugly side of racism with the arrival of the Ku Klux Klan, and as Moses become a spokesperson following his time with Knight and the confidence he's grown from being with Knight, he becomes a target. So we then move on to election day. There's a tremendous scene again where at the head of a small number of Afro-Americans who have the right to vote under the Union Constitution march to the building where they can exercise that right, and they're met by a group of racist Confederates with guns lining the courthouse, sort of reminiscent really of the similar tale when Jack Johnson won the World Heavyweight Championship in Texas, when he defeated he retained the title. Sorry, got that wrong. When Jack Johnson put his world title on the line in Texas against Jess Willard, and surrounding the ring were armed racist Texans, and the score was, Johnson, you must lay down, so that Willard becomes champion, give up your title. It's a very similar sort of statement. The difference in the timeline, of course, is a mere 45 years, but things change very slowly in America, and this film is a tremendous messenger as to what was happening. With Knight escorting them in with his shotgun, he demands tickets, as described, for Republican tickets, because in those days, of course, the Democrat Party were the right-wing party and the Republicans were the Liberal Party, and they eventually find the tickets, and they vote, and of course the results in Jones County in 1875, Democrats 419, Republican 2, so obviously those ballots were disappeared. Wow, sounds a bit similar to what probably happened 3 years ago with regard to Trump asking for those votes. And the response by the Democrat Party was to basically deny those votes and mount a campaign against Trump by threatening him with and trying to enforce, enforcing or about to enforce trumped up charges against him to deny him his right of free speech. And so we move forward to the descendant of Rachel and Newton Knight in a court of law, and the powers that be making it clear that in Mississippi his marriage is illegal. His marriage to a white woman is illegal because he's 1/8 of a African American, and those types of unions are illegal. And so he is a free man if he annuls that marriage, but if he insists on it, he will go to prison. This was American law post Second World War. Bear that in mind. Only 75 years ago.